Hi, I'm Melissa Mortenson of Polka Dot Chair, and I am here in the Fat Quarter Studios today to show you how to finish your Let's Stay Home quilt. Before you move on to finishing, on your pattern there is a list at the end that shows you everything you should have sewn. It'll tell you how many blocks you should have and how many rows and everything. So just go through that really quick, go through the checklist and make sure you have all of your blocks sewn. So after you have all your blocks sewn, we're gonna go ahead and assemble the rows. It's really straightforward for the most part. So I will just show you, this is row one. Row one was the Sawtooth stars. And all I did was sew the blocks together. Standard quarter-inch seam allowance, press your seams to one side. So you can see here, there is row one. I'll back up a little bit so you can see. Same as quilt. Okay. So you're gonna do that with your Sawtooth star blocks and your Ohio star blocks. Those are just really straightforward, stitch them together. The house blocks get stitched together a little bit different way, but not that much different. So the house blocks have a little bit of sashing on the side. So what I'm gonna do is just lay this out, a few of the blocks. So you've got your sashing that you've cut from the background fabric, and you're just very simply, and I'm just gonna lay out a few just so you get the idea. Okay, so it's just each side of the large house gets one piece of sashing. So it's super easy to remember. And then you're gonna look at the pattern, in the pattern there's a quilt assembly diagram, so just refer to that so you know like the tall house, the small house, like which block goes where. And I'm gonna look here. So then I'm just gonna sew that there. And then there's no sashing in between the tall house and the small house. And then we've got another large house, and so we'll need another piece of sashing, and just go ahead and stitch that together, and you're just going to keep moving until you've stitched all of the houses together for both rows. And then the center row, also simple to stitch together. You're just going to stitch together Ohio star block and then a word block, Ohio star block, word block, Ohio, and you're going to end with an Ohio star block. It's very easy. So on the pattern, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna cut your sashing strips, and then you're gonna stitch them together so you've got a long piece of sashing. And I'm just gonna show you on row one quickly. So you need to be careful because this is a thin piece of fabric and it can stretch a little bit. So I just come in and I just start pinning. And just lay it flat. If you've got a flat surface to work on, that's better. If you're trying to do it on your lap, sometimes it'll get you mixed up. Okay, so just gonna keep pinning and pinning and pinning until you get to the end of your row. And I've given you a little bit of extra, it comes off, there's a little bit extra at the end, but I did that on purpose just because, like I said, it's better to have things a little bit too big than having too small. So you're gonna go ahead and pin that down, and then you're just gonna take a quarter-inch seam allowance and you're just gonna stitch the entire length of that. And I stitch from one end to the other. I don't start in the middle, so I just stitch that way. After you've stitched your sashing piece on, I like to come over and just, like I said, it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, so I'll go ahead and cut that. Now, this is where you can kind of go wrong, I guess. You have a lot of rows, and some of the blocks are 12.5 inches, some of them are 6.5, and so you've got lots of different seam allowances. And so if you just start sewing the quilt together on the right side, moving one direction, by the time you get to the bottom, if you're off a quarter-inch every row, by the end, your blocks are not going to line up straight up and down. So normally, if you do this, you can like match up the seams, but since there's sashing, you can't match up the seams. So I have like a little trick that I like to do. So after I've stitched the sashing on, I come over and I mark using a pen that will erase. I just come in and I mark the location of all of my like seam allowances where the blocks are joined together, so that I know when I pin the next row to it, I know where to start pinning. So I'm gonna just mark that one. I'm just kind of mark all for the seams. Okay, so now as I come in and I start pinning my next row on, I know that I'm gonna line up on the sides here, but then I also know that I need this seam right here needs to be on top of this line. So when I pin it, if I get that right on top of each other, and then pin that there, and then come over, we'll do it again. So on the house blocks, the edges of the seam allowance are the edges of the large house block. So I know, like with this next seam here, I need to get the seam between the next large house block and the small house block right on top of my line. So then I'll just go and pin and pin and pin, and then I'll stitch that. So I'll stitch row 2 to that sashing and then press it, and then I will stitch another sashing row to row 2 on the bottom, press it, mark it, and then stitch row 3 on, same thing, press it and mark it so that I'm keeping all of like my columns lined up. And I did notice as I was doing this, I thought it was easier to stitch rows 1 through 4 together and then set it aside, and then stitch rows 5, 6, and 7 together, and then stitch row 5 to row 4, so that you're not like, by the end you don't have this like giant big thing. You're just like joining the 2 pieces together. So if you do it that way, then that will help you keep everything lined up on your quilt as you go. So you're done. Thanks for sewing along with us. I hope you enjoyed the row along. I would love to see what you make. If you share something on social media, use the hashtag Let's Stay Home Quilt. You can also tag me on Instagram at polka.chair or tag Fad Quarter Shop on Instagram, or visit my blog for more details at polka.chair.com.